outside, I see the born of no return. It's just ahead now, it's just ahead now. Can't you see we're rushing for the air? I see the point of no return. Now see the point of no return. It's just ahead.
Well, good evening. It's Monday, May 5th, 2014. You're listening to Wide Awake News on the Rents Radio Network. My name is Gary Hendershot, and for the next hour or so, I'm going to be barking at the moon. And in the background, you may occasionally hear a kaboom, and no, that's not John Holder sending a drone after me. We just seem to have a thunderstorm start up out there. I've got all my UPS batteries charged up, so hopefully if the power gets taken down, we will press on regardless. Well, you know, last week I was kind of hopeful that the Ukraine issue was going to chill off and maybe, you know, these folks were going to settle down and not do a Civil War type thing. And then I heard along about Tuesday or Wednesday something about the IMF. That's the International Monetary Fund, conditioning big loans to the new, shall we say, sort of kind of legitimate government in Kiev. Apparently some conditions were placed on Kiev that if they wanted these big loans from the IMF, they were going to have to do something about them rabble-rousers in western Ukraine. Oh, boy, here we go. You know, because the government in Kiev is desperate to get money. They can't even afford to pay their gas bill to the Russians. And the IMF is standing there, you know, like Daddy Warbucks saying, yeah, sure, we'll help you out, but you got to go kick those boys' ass for us over there, you know. Oh, boy. And sure enough, before the weekend, you know, there was reports of live fire going on in Ukraine. Now, what I'd kind of like to focus on during this segment of tonight's broadcast is the way this is being reported. I want to present something of a comparison for you. Now, this first article I'm going to read you a little chunk of. This came out of the New York Times, and this was published today. And the headliner is Gunfire Heard on Outskirts of Pro-Russian Enclave in Ukraine. This report comes out of Slavyansk in Ukraine. Gunfire echoed around the outskirts of the pro-Russian stronghold of Slavyansk in eastern Ukraine on Monday, news reports said, as the interim president, and I'm going to try to pronounce this fellow's name, you know, please don't take offense. I have nothing personal against you. It's just that, you know, I am an old Southern boy, and saying some of these Eastern European names is a bit of a struggle for me. But the way I read his name, it's Oleksandr. I guess that would be Alexander here in English. Oleksandr Turchinov, I think is how he says his name, said roadblocks were being set up around the capital of Kiev because of fears of provocation during an emotionally charged holiday later in the week. So this report out of the New York Times is talking about how scared everybody in western Ukraine is that provocateurs, wearing Russian uniforms with all the insignia pulled off of them, are going to come sneaking into Kiev and cause trouble. Let's see here. The intensity of the fighting seemed unclear as the Ukrainian military continued its push towards Slavyansk, with limited attacks on at least 2 rebel-held positions in the city's southeast. At least 1 rebel was injured. Ukrainian forces took and subsequently withdrew from a bridge. Shots were exchanged, but no casualties were reported. Arsen Avakov, the acting interior minister, told the Interfax Ukraine news agency that the flare-up began when pro-Russian militants ambushed government forces. Okay, now that's how the New York Times is reporting this. Just for comparison, let's see how RT reported this incident. There were fatalities. Oh, let's see here. This is again published today. Dozens injured, fatalities on both sides in ongoing military op in Slavyansk. This is the same incident being reported on the same day. You heard how the New York Times reported it. Now we're going to hear how Russia Today described this incident. There were fatalities among both Kiev loyalists and local militia members. Now, notice they're not talking about, pointy-horned devils here. They're talking about local militia members. Okay, so they've got a much more subdued terminology for those who support Russia. Over a dozen people have been killed, including some civilians. There was a shooting on the outskirts of Slavyansk as pro-government troops raided a protester checkpoint. Notice they referred to them as protesters on Monday. At least 10 self-defense fighters and their unarmed civilian supporters have been killed in the latest clashes. The commander of the Slavyansk self-defense, Igor Sterlov, told RIA Novosti, I think that's the Russian news agencies. He continued, "We suffered losses, about 10 people, including civilians. 20 to 25 people were injured. I do not know the losses of our adversaries. Clearly, they are smaller than ours. They have armor. Most of our losses came from plainclothes troops disguised as civilians. We fell into their ambush near a petrol station." Okay. Ukrainian Interior Ministry said 4 of its troops were killed and some 30 others injured. There are also casualties among the civilian population of the city. A Ukrainian Army helicopter was downed by heavy machine gun fire and crashed into a river. The aircraft, identified as an Mi-24 helicopter, was hit while doing a target run. Apparently, this helicopter was in firing short-range unguided missiles at positions that they thought were targets of opportunity. I have heard rumors, unconfirmed, that Russian-made helicopter bearing Ukrainian insignia was actually piloted and crewed by Blackwater operatives. Now, again, you have to take this reporting, with kind of a grain of salt. Now, you heard how differently this same incident was reported by the New York Times and by Russia. Chances are the truth lies somewhere in between. It's obvious that both of these news agencies are putting their nation's spin on their reporting, and it's difficult, really, for average folks, it's very difficult to figure, which one is closer to the truth. There was an incident in Odessa where, some people were camped out in front of a trade union building, and apparently some pro-Kiev thugs came by. Now, these guys were not uniformed military. They were not uniformed police. They were just, average folks, came up, wielding clubs and whatever else. And these sit-in demonstrator types, I guess, who apparently were just civilians, unarmed, retreated into this trade union building. And, of course, the trade union building was set on fire. There was considerable loss of life. Some say that the pro-Kiev thugs actually entered the building and quite literally beat some of these people to death and then started the building on fire to hide what they have done. Again, we don't really know. Chances are we won't know for quite some time what really transpired there. Obviously, there have been gangs of what can only be described as thugs on both sides doing what we would consider horrible things. I'm sure that in their own perception, they're thinking, hey, I'm doing this for God, country, and the Ukrainian way, and for mom and apple pie, or whatever they substitute in Ukraine for apple pie. I'm sure that both sides think they're in the right. But as with most situations like this, most of those who are paying the price are average civilians who, are really just trying to carry on their lives as best they can, don't really have an axe to grind with either side, don't really care who sits in the parliament or who sits in the big house over there, as long as they can feed their families and go about their business and not be harassed. Like most of us, average Joe Ukrainian really just wants to live his life and be left alone. But civilians are always the ones who take the biggest punishment in a situation like this. I would caution you, though, to be very suspicious of how the news of incidents like this is reported. We've heard all kinds of stories about how the Eastern government-supported, Kiev-backed guys are bringing in mercenaries from all over the place. Chechens, people being flown in by Saudi Arabia. They're pulling Muslim militants out of the conflict with Syria to go and help Kiev bolster their fighting against their people. We don't really know for sure. A lot of these reports are coming out. We're hearing reports that the Western Ukrainians are getting a lot of help from Russians. They're saying that there's Russian special forces on the ground in Western Ukraine that have pulled all the insignia off their uniforms so they can pass as local militia. The accusations keep going back and forth. Many of the accusations coming out of Western Ukraine point to the United States, and in particular the CIA, for basically stirring the pot and making sure that this conflict continues. Considering the CIA's history, that one's pretty easy to believe. If they're not directly involved, I have a sneaking suspicion they have their friends and fellow travelers and paid mercenaries, and they're doing their bidding. Probably the biggest item that worries most of the rest of Europe, over this is that a lot of the Russian gas that feeds the bulk of Europe kind of traverses pipelines that go through Ukraine. Now, the deal is, Ukraine gets to tap off a little bit of the gas that goes through their country on its way to other countries in Europe for a discount price, and that's kind of the deal that was made with Russia when Russia built pipelines going from these very rich natural gas fields in Russia all the way into Europe. They came in through Ukraine. Ukraine kind of gave them a right-of-way and signed a deal with them, said, okay, you can have a right-of-way, but we get to tap off the gas pipelines at a discount price. And Russia said, okay, well, that's cool. We get to sell for full price to Germany and France and other countries in Europe. And because we used Ukrainian territory as a right-of-way, we'll give them a little discount on the gas. It's a win-win situation for everybody, right? Right? Sounds like just good old-fashioned capitalism to me. But now, since all this trouble's come about, the Russians have said, hey, wait a minute, this deal is no longer good. We made that deal with this other government, and you guys are not really a legitimate elected government. You're a freaking junta put in by the CIA and NATO forces. We don't owe you any special favors. So now you got to pay full price. No more discount. Holy cow. And if the gas gets shut off going to Ukraine, problem is it gets shut off going to most of the rest of Europe. So the International Monetary Fund is in there trying to work some kind of a deal where the gas keeps flowing to the rest of Europe. But there's always strings attached when the International Monetary Fund comes in and opens up their purse. And in the case of the Ukraine, it seems the price that the IMF wants is the subjugation of the pro-Russian eastern portion of Ukraine. Or so it seems. Again, a lot of that is pure speculation on my part. Are you going to take my word for it? I most certainly hope not. I hope you consider the various reports coming out of that area. And as always, make up your own damned mind. Don't just automatically assume that Russia Today is reporting it 100% factual true. Don't just assume that the New York Times is reporting it 100% accurate and true. Chances are, as with most things, the real truth lies somewhere in between. One thing that is interesting is that the United States and its allies in NATO were very quick to recognize the new government in Kiev that was installed by protesters, and it was basically a coup d'etat. They threw out the elected government, put in their very own hand-picked provisional government, and of course, the West just immediately recognized them and said, oh yes, you are the legitimate government of Ukraine. Now you've got the eastern Ukrainians who are basically doing the same thing. They're saying, look, we don't like these bums. We don't want to be associated with them. They do not represent us. So, yeah, we're going to protest, and we'd like to do the same thing they did. We'd like to disavow this current government in that part of the country. We'd like to stand on our own. Well, the United States won't have any of that because, that does not fit with the United States NATO agenda. So, there are little snippets in there that you can kind of consider, as you're chewing on your oatmeal in the morning, think about these things, okay? The duplicity of the reporting, the duplicity of American foreign policy when looking at these two very similar situations. These folks in the East are raising hell and protesting because They don't like these SOBs that are running things in Kiev. They don't want to have anything to do with them. They would rather set up their own little party, do their own thing, maybe even hook up with Russia, because, they've always had very close relations with Russia. Russia's, always, been, kind of the fatherland to them. So, they have much more in common with Russia than they have with this coup government that's currently in Kiev. But don't expect John Kerry or Obama or any of the other NATO leaders to come out praising these freedom fighters in eastern Ukraine. Chances are they'll be referred to, at the very least, as domestic terrorists or rebels or insurgents, or they'll have some inflammatory term to use when they're referring to them. I'm hearing the music in the background, so it is time for our halfway break. Please do stay tuned. We'll be back with more Wide Awake News right after these important commercial announcements. And we're back from that break. Let's see here. On to other news. This Ukrainian situation. I just while we had the break, I was looking a little bit of the chat here. There's people out there saying, Hendershot, you don't know nothing. Well, I listen to a lot of alternative media, and if there's one thing out there that frustrates the living daylights out of me, it's talking heads coming on these shows, and doing these YouTube broadcasts, who lead you to believe that they actually know what the hell is going on. Well, excuse me. I will be the first to admit that I don't know what's going on. I'm reading articles provided by numerous sources and trying to make sense out of very complicated issues. And quite often, we get so suspicious of the U.S. media and the Western media and the U.S. government and Western governments. We get so suspicious that, we just immediately assume anything that comes out of the New York Times, anything that comes out of Washington, D.C. is just a bull-faced lie. And, the terrible thing is, a lot of times, we're right, okay? But you cannot assume that just because information is coming from an alternative source, say Russian government or Russian media, you cannot assume that that's true and accurate either, because all of these people got their axe to grind. And the more we're being played like pawns, okay, we're caught between the two. And we don't know which side's telling us the truth. Chances are neither of them is really telling us the truth. They're both telling us their line of propaganda. And you got to be savvy to that. And you got to be aware that a lot of this is the roll up to getting you excited enough to pick up a gun for Mom, the American flag, and apple pie. I do believe that there are factions within the U.S. government and many NATO nations that would just love to get a really good old-fashioned shooting war going to get you distracted from some of the other issues that are nearer and dearer to your heart, like whether or not you're going to be able to pay your mortgage next month. Moving on to other news. We had an issue that, still is not over out in Nevada, where, a homegrown terrorist, yeah, Harry Reid. Yeah, this guy here, he looks like a terrorist. He looks a little bit more like Hopalong Cassidy to me than a terrorist, but that's okay. Harry Reid's convinced this guy is a terrorist. This guy just dug in his heels and said, look, you pushed me into a corner. I ain't going to take it no more. And there's a lot of us here in the United States that are feeling that way. We feel like, we've been very forgiving. We've been very accepting. frankly, we have put up with a lot of bullshit, okay? The bullshit meter is off the scale. We've put up with a lot, and we're sick and tired of it, and we really don't want to take it anymore. Well, this guy Bundy out in Nevada, kind of became a rallying point for many who have felt that, the federal government has just been going, crazy over the last few years. Some of the stuff that they have done, some of the stuff they have admitted to doing is horrible. And some of the stuff that, they've been sneaking back doors about, is even worse. But, the backlash against Bundy has been pretty stiff. Some people out there say he's a racist, and some people say that because he's a Mormon, he's a member of a cult and this, that, and the other thing. A lot of negative press targeted at Bundy that I think people within government, people within media, hope will cause him to lose support among the alternative community, those of us who refer to ourselves as patriots or truthers or whatever, whatever name you want to use this week. Well, I think it got ramped up a little bit when Harry Reid came out saying that, these people were homegrown terrorists. Now, a new report comes out. This report just came out today. Nevada lawmaker demands immediate action against armed separatists. Armed separatists. Now, what kind of image does that paint in your mind? Armed separatists. You see Che Guevara. You see, Castro. What picture does that put in your mind? Okay. Armed separatists. Now, do you see a cowboy herding cattle on a horse, with his 6-gun and his cowboy hat? Is that the image that armed separatist puts in your head? You see how they're creating imagery for you. The United States congressman who represents most of Clark County, Nevada, is calling on the state's government to intervene in the situation at Clive Bundy's cattle ranch and get rid of those armed separatists who have stood guard there for weeks. Although a land dispute between the 67-year-old cattle rancher and the U.S. Bureau of Land Management is relatively calm after escalating to the point of becoming an armed standoff involving militiamen and the federal government in mid-April, at least one lawmaker is still upset about the situation in Bunkerville, Nevada. What do you think of that? Recounting tales from constituents that painted Bundy as nothing but a welfare rancher living off the taxpayer subsidy with a sense of entitlement. Yeah. Representative Horsford told the convention goers that Nevada Governor Brian Sandoval and his administration need to step in as soon as possible. What do you think of that? Here's another related report. Westerners fear Obama preparing monuments land grab. See, what you got to understand is that although Bundy has become the focus of this situation, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Just south of Canyonlands National Park, the Red Rock Wonders merge into a scrubland oasis with its peaks. It's a beautiful place. It's very unique topography. Even as supporters of a conservation area remain hopeful, they're ready for Plan B, asking President Obama for a national monument. Basically, national monument means they want to put it off limits to you, your little four-wheeler, your dirt bike. They don't want any, human activity in that area. The Utah delegates are only fumbling the ball. They aren't really tackling it. Obama already has named a handful of monuments across the country. Here's another article, this one from the Washington Times. Hold your horses. Nevada standoff reveals bigger fight over federally owned land. Just how much land does the federal government claim to own in some of those western states? Some say as much as 82% of the acreage of some of those big western states with the straight borders, you know the ones I'm talking about. 82%. How much land does the federal government own? A congressional survey said the federal government owns about 640 million acres, or about 28% of the nation's land mass. Roughly 90% of that property is in the western states. Put another way, 1 out of every 2 acres in the West is federally owned. In Nevada, the figure is 81%. In Alaska, 61%. Utah, 66%. So maybe the federal government just doesn't have enough land to keep them happy, huh? I'm hearing the music. I've got to step out for a moment. Be right back after these messages. And we're back from that last break of the evening. Boy, I tell you, I got about 10 minutes here to finish up a number of items in the news. Well, Benghazi is back in the news again. This thing's haunting the Obama administration, kind of like Watergate haunted Nixon. It's it would be amusing if people had not died in that incident. Frankly, all things considered, it's absolute embarrassment. Now, just to remind you, here's the scenario. It appears that the United States government, in all of its infinite wisdom, decided that we needed to go kick ass in Syria. And we were looking for some proxy warriors to go over there and do the dirty business. And we found some fellows in Libya who apparently had been instrumental in kicking out Gaddafi, and we decided that they would be, excellent cannon fodder to send over to Libya or to Syria. And okay, all they need is some Stinger missiles and some anti-tank rockets and this, that, and the other thing. They go do the dirty deed for us. Okay, sound cool. Turns out these fellows were mostly Al Qaeda. Now there is a competing story. There is a story that this Benghazi thing was set up to make President Obama look manly. Okay, it was supposed to be one of these deals where our guys were going to invade the what they keep referring to as an embassy. It was not an embassy. It was kind of like, it was a little outpost. There were some CIA people there, and but it was it wasn't really a full-fledged embassy in Benghazi. But but there supposedly some guys who were on our side were gonna pretend to come in and take it over. And then we were going to call in, the Marines and chase them out. And everybody was supposed to be, living happily ever after. And Obama was going to be able to strut that he was a manly man and kick their ass. Yeah, that story is floating around out there. There is no proof to it, but, considering some of the stuff that the CIA and the federal government gets themselves involved in, I could believe that situation. Bottom line is some incriminating emails have come out that kind of point the finger at the White House for being directly involved in, at the very least, covering the failure of the U.S. to protect these Americans in Libya. At the very least, it appears that the Obama administration is trying to cover up their failure to protect American citizens in Libya. That, yeah, I think there's probably enough proof out there right now that we could say, yeah, they were trying to cover it up. And as old Dickie Nixon said, it ain't the dirty deed that'll get you, it's the cover-up. So, yeah, the Obama administration right now is once again on the ropes. These guys are starting to, look like they got as much Teflon smeared on them as old Slick Willie. It just seems nothing sticks to them. But Democrats are trying like hell to put a boycott on the Benghazi probes. And this is an article from Fox News. I got to give the so-called mainstream media credit where credit's due. GOP Representative King blasts Democrats' arrogant call to boycott Benghazi probe. This came out yesterday. A top Republican on the House Intelligence Committee slammed his Democratic colleagues Sunday for suggesting fellow Democrats boycott the newly announced committee tasked with probing the Benghazi attacks. Said doing so would be terribly arrogant and wrong. The call for a boycott was made earlier by Adam Schiff, Democrat from California, during an interview on Fox News Sunday. He was responding to House Speaker John Boehner's announcement Friday that the House would vote on a select committee to investigate Benghazi. It's taken them this long. King, speaking afterwards with Fox News, said this would be a mistake for Democrats as it would show they cannot defend the administration. If Democrats boycott this committee, refuse to take part, the American people are going to conclude, and I think quite rightly, that they feel they have something to hide. Interesting. Needless to say, that little tidbit. Now, again, Fox News. Fox News has an axe to grind with the Democratic Party. Typically, Fox News is the propaganda source for the Republican Party, where MSNBC and CNN tend to be the propaganda arm for the Democratic Party. On most major issues, such as the Ukraine situation, they are in lockstep. But on, the little backroom infighting nonsense, like, did the president really fail to protect Americans at Benghazi when that situation got out of control, and then cover it up? Yeah, okay, that they don't want discussed. So, there's another one. Consider. Make up your own damn mind. Now, how many of you out there were thinking that, the Paul family was going to save us next time around? A lot of people are speculating that next time around we're going to have to choose between, another Bush and another Clinton to help us. A lot of people are thinking, oh, well, hey, there is that guy Rand Paul. He's Ron Paul's kid. He might save us. Well, how about this article? At Derby Day with Murdoch, Rand Paul goes through his paces. Yes, Louisville, Kentucky, at the running of the Kentucky Derby. Mr. Paul's guest was a special one. The libertarian brand of politics championed by Mr. Paul and his deep reservations about American intervention overseas have prompted more than a bit of wariness in the Wall Street Journal's editorial pages. But his guest at the Kentucky Derby was none other than kingmaker Rupert Murdoch, one of the ruling oligarchs of the United States, part of the real power behind the throne. Rupert Murdoch can throw enough money around that he can basically buy a president or a Supreme Court judge. He's one of, a small minority, less than 0.2%, who quite literally control enough assets that they can chart the course of the United States over your objections. So Rand Paul cozying up to Rupert Murdoch at the Kentucky Derby. Now, how many of you out there were betting that, Rand Paul was going to come riding over the crest on a white horse and save you from them evil Democrats and Republicans with his libertarian sword of justice? Looks like he's cozying up to the Kingmaker to try and get positioned for a run. Do I know that for a fact? Hell no. It's like everything else. You have to read the reports. You have to consider the various arguments on the table. And yeah, you got to make up your own damn mind. Oh, let's see here. John Kerry. John Kerry. Here again, it'd be almost funny. Remember when John Kerry stuck his foot in the mouth? We're all set to invade Syria. And John Kerry, in kind of a casual, offhand statement that I'm sure he thought, would just, be forgotten the next day, says, "Oh yeah, if Syria, gets rid of their chemical weapons, we wouldn't really have any good reason to, blow them back to the Stone Age." And the next day, Putin was out there cutting a deal with Assad, saying, "Yeah, sure, no problem, we'll get rid of them. We don't need them anyway. As long as Israel doesn't throw their nukes at us, we won't. We don't have any use for them anyhow. So, yeah, sure, we'll get rid of them." And, of course, Kerry had egg on his face. Well, here recently, John Kerry, pictured here, speaking before AIPAC, the American-Israeli, lobbying group that really should be registered as an agent of a foreign government, but has way more influence over American politics than they really should, based on the fact that they bless American politicians with money. Believe it or not, your money. Yeah, how about that? Don't you like that plan? But Kerry apparently put his foot in his mouth again, saying that, Israel better be careful because, they're starting to look like an apartheid state. Apartheid. Remember apartheid? Well, that was those evil white guys running South Africa and subjugating the native black people, making them stay in, little hovels outside the main cities. They had their little self-governing enclaves where, if they ever said boo to anybody, the white guys would come in and beat the living crap out of them. But other than that, they were pretty much left alone to their own devices. They could come in and do all the dirty job that the white folks in South Africa didn't want to do. But once the workday was done, they had to get the hell out of there and go back to Soweto and all their nasty little hovels out in the countryside. Does that kind of sound like the way Palestinians are treated in Israel? And of course, Benjamin Netanyahu threw a little bit of gasoline on the fire by coming right out and saying, we have freedom of speech and freedom of this and freedom of that, but it's only free for Jewish people in Israel. Now, if you happen to be an Israeli citizen who is not a Jewish person, no, you don't have any rights, and we'll kick your ass anytime we damn well feel about it. But just the mere mention of Israel and apartheid in the same sentence got John Kerry in a hell of a lot of trouble, and he's been backpedaling on that one. Doesn't matter if it's true, the fact that he would dare to mention Israel and apartheid in the same sentence has caused John Kerry considerable consternation. And that's one that, those of us on the sidelines just kind of shake our heads and giggle at because, just another day in paradise. Well, I tell you, that's it for me tonight. I'm hearing the music in the background. I'm done barking at the moon for this Monday, but you betcha I'll be back next Monday to do it again. Y'all have a good evening now and take care of yourselves.
Love of the old turnarounds. None of us are leaving here alive. Whoa, what will you say? What will you say? calling out to you. Won't you turn around? Oh, I'm calling out to you. Won't you turn around?